And so the first person that I would like to call forward is Dr. Rowan Crowe, and she is here to tell us about the work that's been done on campus to date. Of course, the university has, this is not the first time, or the first initiative that UW has delved into the issue of murdered and missing Indigenous women. So Dr. Rowan is from the Institute of Women and Gender Studies and is an artist and scholar with a doctorate from OISE at the University of Toronto with the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. So if Dr. Rowan Crowe could come forward and get us started.
Thank you so much, Diane, and thanks to everybody for taking the time today to be here. Thanks to WABCanoe, President Trimby, and the Indigenous Advisory Council for facilitating this discussion here today at the University of Winnipeg, Treaty 1 territory, heart of the Métis. I'm really nervous, as I always am in these kinds of events, because I'm holding all of my feelings and also my thinking about this. So I'm going to be referring to my notes today. And I want to especially thank the families who have taught me over the years about love and resilience and how to keep searching for those who are missing in the face of widespread denial, indifference, and discouragement of this reality. It's my task today to provide some context about the relationship between the University of Winnipeg and the issue of murdered and missing women, girls, Two-Spirit, and trans people. It is an incomplete history. There have been for me several crucial moments in my own queer, white, settler consciousness that have led me to be more aware. One, of course, was Oka, the crisis in 1990, when the Canadian military was called to confront the Mohawk of Kanesatake, who were defending their sacred land from development. Another crucial moment for me was when I learned about the murder of Helen Betty Osborne. When I walk down the street at Ellis, approaching the University of Winnipeg, there isn't a time when I do not remember Helen Betty Osborne and all of the other people who have gone missing. Helen Betty, as many of you know, and will know as a family member, was abducted and brutally murdered near the Pas in 1971. She was 19 years old. The 4 young white men responsible for her death did not face trial for 16 years. 16 years. Let me read a poem by Métis poet Marilyn Dumont. Helen Betty Osborne. Betty, if I set out to write this poem about you, it might turn out instead to be about me or any one of my female relatives. It might turn out to be about this young Native girl growing up in rural Alberta, in a town with fewer Indians than ideas about Indians, in a town just south of the Aryan nations. It might turn out to be about Anna May Aquash, Donald Marshall, or Richard Cardinal. It might even turn out to be about our grandmothers, beasts of burden in the fur trade, skinning, scraping, pounding, packing, left behind for the British standard of womanhood, left for white melting-skinned women, not bits of brown women, left here in this wilderness, in this colony. Betty, if I write a poem about you, it might turn out to be about hunting season on Native women, about open season on Native women. It might turn out to be about your face, young and hopeful, staring back at me, hollow now, from a blank and white page. It might turn out to be about townsfolk, gentle word, townsfolk who believed Native girls were easy and less likely to complain if sexual proposition led to violence. Betty, if I write this poem. And this was written in 1996 by Métis poet Marilyn Dumont. In 2007, the University of Winnipeg remembered Helen Betty Osborne and her dream to become a teacher by dedicating to her the Helen Betty Osborne building at the corner of Ellis and Yonge Street. Here I quote recent UW President Lloyd Axworthy. With this naming, we recognize and remember Helen Betty Osborne, as well as the many other Aboriginal women whose lives have been marked by violence. Thanks to the hard work of her family and the foundation that bears her name, Helen Betty Osborne stands as a symbol of hope for young Aboriginal people. Her commitment to education is an inspiration to us all. The Weechiwakanak Learning Center is now housed in Helen Betty Osborne building. Through my joint appointment in the Women's and Gender Studies Department and as the co-director of the Institute for Women's and Gender Studies, working alongside Dr. Fiona Green and many others for the last 8 years, I have been afforded the opportunity and the resources from the Margaret Lawrence Endowment Fund to work outside the usual confines of the Academy. Much of the work as the Institute has involved creating feminist interventions and creating space for feminist art and dialogue. IWGS has held educational events on and off campus. We held a women's Indigenous symposium about education here at the University of Winnipeg and have supported numerous marches, concerts, and gatherings. IWGS has been directly involved in supporting the families of murdered and missing women. I was approached 6 years ago by Bernadette Smith, whose sister Claudette Osborne went missing from Winnipeg. I have learned so much from Bernadette Smith, from Barb Houle, who I also met in those early days, especially in her fierce love and dedication to addressing the ongoing needs of families, a concern that we both share in relation to the possibility of an inquiry. Led by Bernadette Smith, Bernice to some of you, led by Bernie's vision and determination, IWGS held a healing retreat with families. We co-founded with Kim Hunter, Tanya Capo, and Linda English, the Coalition for Families of Murdered and Missing Women in Manitoba, and in collaboration with the Manitoba Department of Aboriginal and Northern Affairs and Leslie Spillett of Ganaganichik, we developed and launched the Manitoba Toolkit to assist families of missing persons and persons at risk. IWGS was also honored to work with local Métis artist Jamie Black in the development and launch of the Red Dress Project. How many of you know the Red Dress Project? Great. It's had really great reach. It's an interdisciplinary art and education project that was to raise awareness surrounding the murder and disappearance of Aboriginal women across Canada. Jamie Black hung over 120 red dresses across campus here at the university, along with an educational campaign in the community. And this art installation brought awareness to the issue with staff, students, and faculty in the larger community. Last year, IWGS hosted a long table discussion about art and violence at the Winnipeg Art Gallery and a teach-in, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, in support of Walking with Our Sisters, the art installation at Urban Shaman Gallery. It has been an IWGS core value in organizing these kinds of events at the University of Winnipeg that those who are directly impacted must be respectfully consulted. In this case, the families of the murdered and missing. This is a value that must be held when thinking about this issue. The emotional labor of the families who have suffered these tremendous losses must remain central and visible. Their knowledge, the families, their experiences, and their insights must be at the center of these deliberations. There are many critical factors to address when looking at colonial violence against Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and trans people. Exploration of racialized and sexualized violence lead to discussions of racism, colonization, the history of a forced assimilation, residential schools, ongoing violence, dispossession and destruction of the land, and impoverishment, All of these things are connected. I was very happy to find when I started looking at the University of Winnipeg and seeing all the work that was being done by numerous departments in the Faculty of Arts. Faculty from the departments of Criminal Justice, English, History, Indigenous Studies, Philosophy, Political Science, Sociology, Religion, Rhetoric, Writing and Communications, Urban and Inner Cities, and Women and Gender Studies. These faculty have engaged in this difficult work. Also, students here at the University of Winnipeg have meaningfully engaged in this issue. The University of Winnipeg Aboriginal Student Council has been vital on campus. The University of Winnipeg Students' Union, the UWSA, has been very active in addressing key social issues such as affordability and accessibility of education for all. This too is connected. Currently, Alison Reimer, UWSA Vice President Student Services, and the UWSA have been organizing in support of the UN Women's Safe Cities initiatives. The UW has partnered with the city and the province, notably the first university in the world to do so, as an intervention site to end sexual violence against women. All women have the right to study, work, socialize without fear of gender-based harassment or violence on campus. All women, two-spirit, and trans people. Dr. Trish Salah from the Department of Women's and Gender Studies is also hosting a one-day symposium on February 28th entitled Decolonizing and Decriminalizing Trans Genres. This symposium centers the critical and creative work of Black and Indigenous trans and two-spirit writers, artists, scholars, and activists. Recognizing the violent force of institutionalized racism, police brutality, colonialism, and the criminalization of trans of color lives, particularly in the area of sex work, this symposium foregrounds these intersections in trans experience and representation. And here it is important to remember the life of two-spirit and trans people who are also missing or whose lives have been lost. Rose Osborne, Helen Betty's younger sibling, who was brutally murdered in Winnipeg in 2010. According to the scholar Alex Wilson, Rose Osborne was also known as Calvin. The media attention devoted to this coverage of the murder focused on the fact that he was Helen's brother, which diverted from the fact that she, Rose, was transgender and a victim of a heinous hate crime. Wilson continues by hoping that people might consider Rose's story as just as important to understanding and undoing and advocating for murdered and missing Aboriginal women in Canada. We also know that Colton Pratt is still missing. Colonization and patriarchy are like this, tight, and they intertwine with other forms of oppression and hatred, like white supremacy, misogyny, transphobia, homophobia, and heteronormativity. We must ensure that all forms of oppression are considered in our thinking so that we do not erase the violence against transgender and two-spirit people. I would like to close by discussing the We Care campaign by University of Winnipeg educator Leah Gazan. The We Care campaign and the Institute of Women's and Gender Studies will be collaborating on an event with the Manitoba Craft Guild during International Women's Week. The We Care campaign, and you can find them online. How many of you are aware of the We Care campaign and have met Leah Gazan? The campaign was established to engage Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians to take a united and firm stance to ensure the safety of Indigenous women and girls, that it is realized, and trans, two-spirit and trans people is realized in Canada. In 2013, James Anana, former Special Rapporteur on Indigenous Issues for the United Nations, called the state of violence and number of murdered and missing people in Canada a national crisis. This has been noted in a recent report completed about violence against Indigenous women and girls, also by the RCMP in 2014. The We Care campaign aims to educate the broader public about the serious crisis relating the violence against Indigenous women, Two-Spirit, girls, and trans people. It is an opportunity for all Canadians to demonstrate compassion, love, and hope while putting pressure on all levels of government to support a national inquiry and immediate action to address the serious issue impacting families and communities across Canada. The We Care campaign is a firm statement of solidarity to let all levels of government in Canada know that we care, and we will not stop until Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and transgender people can enjoy safety in cities, towns, and communities throughout Turtle Island. Thank you again. It's an honor to have this time to speak to you today. Yes. And on February 14th, there's the 8th annual Memorial March for all missing and murdered here in Winnipeg. And I think they're meeting at the University at Winnipeg at 1:30 p.m. So thank you so much for your time.